The water is warm around you, warm in the way tropical shallows are warm after a long day of sunlight, and beneath you the seagrass bends in a slow green motion, as though the sea itself is breathing through every blade. Above, the surface is still close enough to shimmer, a silver ceiling broken into soft ripples, but already the noise of the open air has thinned into a muffled hush. You are not sinking far into darkness yet, only drifting downward into a quieter brightness, where the Sulu Sea gathers its clear water over sand, coral fragments, and meadows of grass. The meadow below you does not look like a forest at first, because everything here is low and yielding, pressed close to the pale floor by the gentle weight of the tide. Long ribbons of seagrass lean and rise, each blade catching sunlight in a wavering line before letting it slip away again. The sand between them is not empty, but softly marked with tiny trails, little pits, shell shadows, and the fine, unsettled dust of lives, moving slowly beneath the surface. If you let yourself hover there, without hurry, the whole bed begins to open, and what seemed like stillness becomes a quiet, breathing world. These are the seagrass beds of the Sulu Sea, where the Philippines curves toward Malaysia and Borneo, and the water rests over islands, reefs, channels, lagoons, and shallow shelves. Here the sea is not only blue distance, but a wide, living edge, where sunlight can still reach the bottom, and plants can root themselves in the sand. Seagrasses are not seaweeds, though they move like seaweeds in the current, because they are flowering plants that returned to the ocean long ago and learned to bloom beneath salt water. Their roots hold the bottom gently together, and their leaves slow the water, and the whole meadow becomes a soft green harbor. You drift lower, close enough now to see the blades individually, some broad and strap-like, some thin as green threads, some rounded and delicate like little leaves laid flat against the sand. Turtle grass and eelgrass relatives, paddle-shaped halophila, fine halodule, sturdy enhalus with its long ribbons, and other seagrasses share the shallows in overlapping patches, each kind finding a slightly different comfort in depth, light, current, and sediment. Nothing appears arranged, and yet the meadow has an order, like a woven mat made by tides and seasons rather than hands. The plants stand where the water allows them to stand, and together they make a place of shelter. The light in these beds is green gold and patient, broken by the surface into moving coins that travel over the sand and disappear under the leaves. Every ripple above writes itself below, so the meadow is never entirely still, even when the weather is quiet and the horizon seems to be sleeping. The blades sway together with the small passing motions of the sea, and because they are many, they soften each current before it can lift too much sand. This is one of the first secrets of a seagrass meadow, that it calms the water around it, and in that calmer water, tiny lives can settle. Among the roots and leaves, the smallest animals begin the story, because they are everywhere, though they ask for almost no attention. Little snails graze films from the leaf surfaces, minute crustaceans cling and step between green edges, and transparent shrimp hold themselves nearly invisible until they bend the light by moving. Worms tunnel in the sediment, brittle stars curl beneath the litter, and young clams lie buried with only the faintest openings to the water above them. The meadow is full of small motions that do not disturb the peace, and each one adds a quiet note to the slow music of the bed. A blade of seagrass is a place to rest, but it is also a surface where smaller plants and animals gather, because in the sea, nearly every surface becomes a home. Fine algae grow as soft coatings. Diatoms shine invisibly in their glassy cases, and tiny animals feed over them with patient mouths that scrape, brush, and sift. These coverings can look like dust to the eye, but they are food, shade, chemistry, and texture all at once, a thin living skin on every moving leaf. When a little fish nips along the blade, it is tasting the meadow's quiet abundance. You might see a rabbitfish moving through the grass in a loose, careful group, its body bright for a moment and then muted again by shadow. Rabbitfish belong naturally to places like these, feeding on algae and plant growth, slipping between seagrass and reef as the day changes, and leaving almost no sign except a shift in the water. Nearby, small wrasses and gobies keep close to the bottom, while juvenile snappers and emperors use the meadow as a nursery before they grow into wider movements. In this way, the seagrass bed is not separate from the reef, but joined to it by lives that wander. The sand is pale because much of it has been made by older reefs, by shells, coralline fragments, broken skeletons of animals that once drew minerals from seawater and left their quiet remains behind. Over time, these fragments soften into grains, and the grains collect in sheltered shallows where roots can hold them still. The Sulu Sea is ringed and crossed by reefs, islands, and channels, and the seagrass beds often lie in the gentler places between exposed coral walls and the landward shore. Here, geology becomes bedding, and bedding becomes meadow, and the meadow becomes a slow green memory of reef and tide. The current moves across your shoulders like a thought passing through sleep, not strong enough to carry you away, but steady enough to remind you that nothing here is sealed off. Monsoon winds, tides, island channels, and the breathing exchange between shallow lagoons and deeper water all touch these beds. Some days the water is almost glassy, and some days fine sediment rises and makes the world milky, yet the seagrass keeps working, bending rather than resisting, filtering light through its moving leaves. Its strength is not hardness, but flexibility. A little farther along the meadow, the leaves grow taller, and the space between them becomes a dimmer room, filled with green strips and narrow shadows. Young fish hang inside this room with a stillness that feels deliberate, their bodies lined up with the blades so that shape disappears into pattern. A pipefish may be there, thin and secretive, its long snout pointing downward, its body so much like a drifting stem that the eye has to learn it slowly. The longer you watch, the more the meadow reveals its gift for hiding. This hiding is not fear, not in the way stories often tell it, but simply the soft intelligence of being small in a wide sea. A juvenile fish that rests among blades has more edges around it, more broken light, more time to grow before it joins the open water. Tiny crabs tuck themselves beside roots. Seahorses sometimes hold fast with curled tails in seagrass and neighboring algae, and little mollusks take the color of the floor into their shells. In these shallow beds, survival is quiet and woven, not dramatic, because life often continues by becoming part of the pattern. Now and then a shadow passes over the meadow, and the smaller fish fold themselves more deeply into green. It may be a trevally moving along the edge, or a needlefish nearer the surface, or simply a cloud crossing the sun and loosening the brightness below. The meadow does not change its rhythm for long, because the blades keep swaying, the snails keep grazing, and the sand keeps receiving the faint rain of particles from above. Even interruption is softened here, dissolved into motion until the bed returns to its long breath. As you drift onward, the water becomes clearer again, and the leaves below show pale bite marks, small arcs, and ragged edges where larger grazers have fed. Green turtles sometimes come to seagrass meadows to crop the blades, moving with a gravity so unhurried that they seem less like visitors than old thoughts returning. Their grazing can keep new growth fresh, and their bodies carry nutrients through the sea, linking feeding grounds with resting places and distant beaches. When one lowers its head to the meadow, the entire scene feels ancient and untroubled. A green turtle feeding in seagrass does not hurry, because the meadow itself is a meal laid out by sunlight, roots, and time. It bites, rises slightly, drifts, and bites again, while remoras may cling beneath its shell and little fish inspect the loosened fragments in its wake. The turtle's eye is dark and calm, reflecting a small, trembling version of the water around it, and then it lifts away with strokes that hardly disturb the blades. It leaves behind only a cropped patch, a faint cloud of sand, and the sense that something old has passed through. In some parts of the southern Philippines, where seagrass is broad and persistent, dugongs have also been tied to these underwater meadows. A dugong feeds by rooting gently through the bottom, leaving curved trails in the grass and sand, as though a slow hand has combed the seafloor. You may not see one because they are rare and quiet, and their presence in any place is something to be treated with tenderness rather than expectation. But the meadow holds the kind of food they need, and that possibility gives the water a deep, mammalian softness. The dugongs world is a world of breath and grazing, of rising to the surface and returning to the bottom, of following meadows whose health is written in the leaves. Its mouth is shaped for feeding low, and its body is made for unhurried travel through warm coastal water. In the imagination of the seagrass bed, the dugong is less a spectacle than a reminder that even the largest gentleness depends on humble plants rooted in sand. A meadow can cradle creatures much bigger than itself seems able to hold. The plants make food from sunlight, as all green plants do, but here the sunlight arrives through water, softened, bent, and filtered before it reaches each blade. The seagrass takes in carbon through its leaves, sends energy down into roots and rhizomes, and stores part of that abundance in the sediment beneath it. In quiet beds, organic matter can become buried slowly, protected from quick decay by waterlogged sand and mud. So the meadow becomes both a living field and a hidden storehouse. What looks light and waving above may be deep and anchored below. The roots and rhizomes are the meadow's underground conversation. Though underwater there is no true underground, only the dimmer layer where sand closes gently around living tissue. They bind one shoot to another, spread through the sediment, and help new leaves rise in patches that can grow, thin, recover, or shift with seasons. A storm may tear at the shallows, or cloudy water may dim the light, yet a healthy meadow often answers slowly, sending up new blades when conditions soften again. Its patience is not passive, but rooted. You are close enough now to see small bubbles clinging to some leaves, where sunlight has worked through the morning and afternoon. These bubbles are not ornaments, though they look like pearls caught in green hair because they are part of the plant's exchange with the water. Oxygen gathers, dissolves, and moves outward, becoming one more quiet contribution to the little animals that shelter here. Even breathing in a seagrass meadow feels shared across leaves, shells, gills, and the open water between them. The Sulu Sea around these beds is part of the great tropical marine region where species richness is high and where reefs, mangroves, beaches, and seagrass meadows often lie close enough to influence one another. A fish may begin its early life in the leaf shadow, feed later over coral rubble, and rest at night near mangrove roots if the coast allows such passage. Tides carry larvae, fragments, scent, and nutrients from one habitat to another, making the shallow sea a set of overlapping rooms rather than separate places. In this connected landscape, the meadow is a quiet threshold. At the edge of the seagrass, the bottom may change without ceremony, from rooted green to coral rubble, from rubble to patch reef, from patch reef to blue. Small damselfish hover above coral heads nearby, while sand-dwelling lizardfish lie still in the open, and rays may pass over the flats with wings stirring faint trails. The seagrass does not end so much as loosen, its blades becoming scattered, then rare, then absent as the floor slopes or hardens. Boundaries underwater are often soft, and life crosses them with ease. In the softer parts of the bed, sea cucumbers rest like dark, patient shapes on the sand, feeding on fine organic matter that settles from the water and from the meadow itself. They take in sediment, process what can be used, and return the rest in cleaner coils, slowly turning the bottom in a way that is easy to overlook. Around them, tiny fish nose through the grains, and small crabs step carefully as though walking across a sleeping animal's blanket. The work of the meadow is not only growth, but recycling. If you let your attention slow even further, the sediment becomes a landscape of its own, with ridges, burrows, dimples, and faintly raised mounds. Some marks were made moments ago by shrimp or worms, while others are older, softened by passing currents, until they are nearly gone. The bottom keeps a brief record, but not a permanent one, because the sea edits everything with movement grain by grain, until each trace becomes part of the general quiet. Nothing here needs to remain sharp for long, and that is part of the piece. The water over the Sulu beds can hold a delicate cloud of plankton, so fine that you notice it only when light catches the particles drifting past your face. These small suspended lives feed young fish, filter feeders, and the larger chain of animals that move through the shallows. At night, some plankton may glimmer when disturbed, giving the water a faint living sparkle, a soft response to motion rather than a flame. The meadow by darkness is still green in memory, but its visible language becomes light. As evening settles over the islands above, the seagrass beds change without losing their calm. Day-feeding fish tuck themselves into safer positions, nocturnal animals begin to move, and the whole meadow seems to turn inward as the last gold leaves the water. Crabs become bolder, shrimp lift from the blades, and small eyes shine briefly when they catch a passing ray of moon or starlight from the surface. The bed is not asleep, but its wakefulness is quiet. In darkness, the plants no longer make food from sunlight, and the balance of gases shifts gently as leaves, roots, microbes, and animals continue to breathe. This nightly change is ordinary, part of the rhythm of every seagrass meadow, and the creatures here are shaped around it as naturally as around the tide. The water may feel a little cooler, the sand a little more shadowed, and the meadow a little more secretive, but nothing has fallen away from order. It has simply entered another phase. The surface above you is now a darker skin, reflecting a sky you cannot see clearly, while below you, the blades move as if listening. Tiny luminous sparks may appear when the water is stirred, each one brief and delicate, not enough to brighten the meadow, but enough to suggest that darkness here is alive with response. A fish turns, a shrimp flicks away, a small current passes your hand, and for an instant there is a scattered dust of blue-green shine. The glow disappears almost as soon as it arrives, leaving behind a deeper stillness. Bioluminescence belongs more famously to the deep sea, yet in warm coastal waters, certain plankton can give the night a soft living shimmer. It is not the steady light of a lamp, but a touch-lit flicker, a chemistry released in tiny bodies when motion passes through them. Around the seagrass, where water slows and particles gather, these small sparks can feel especially intimate, like stars caught low among leaves. The meadow becomes a sky turned upside down, with darkness above and stars beneath. You continue to drift through this darkness, not downward into a trench, but inward into detail, because a shallow seagrass bed can be deep in another way. Depth here is not measured only by meters, but by layers of relation, by roots under sand, grazers over leaves, larvae in water, turtles crossing distances, and islands shaping currents. Every small place opens into a larger one, and every larger one returns to the small, until the meadow feels endless without ever needing to be vast. It is a quiet kind of depth. In the morning, when sunlight returns, the first brightness enters at an angle and lies across the blades in long wavering bands. Fish emerge from shelter by degrees, not all at once, and the grazers resume their patient work as the plants begin again to turn light into living tissue. The meadow does not announce the new day because it has no need for announcement, only the steady renewal of processes that have been repeating through seasons and tides. Dawn comes here as a slow green opening. Some seagrass leaves are scarred by epiphytes, by bites, by age, by the simple wear of moving through water while rooted in one place. Older leaves may break and drift away, becoming detritus that feeds microbes and small animals, while younger blades rise from the base with a brighter color. This constant replacement lets the meadow remain itself while never being exactly the same. The way a sleeping body breathes through the night and wakes changed but continuous. Its identity is not fixed but flowing. A school of small fish passes through, each body keeping the distance of the others with effortless precision, and for a moment the meadow seems to have a second current inside it. They turn as one, silver sides catching the light, and then they disappear into the green as though poured into the leaves. Their movement is coordinated without being hurried, an answer to water pressure, vision, and the subtle signals of nearby bodies. Even quickness here can feel smooth. Near the base of the seagrass, where the leaves meet sand, there are places of shade that remain cool-looking even in bright tropical light. Juvenile fish rest there with their mouths opening and closing, drawing water across gills in a rhythm almost too gentle to notice. A small crab lifts one claw, tests the current, and lowers it again, while a snail continues along a blade as if crossing a green bridge suspended above the floor. The scene is full of lives touching the world lightly, each one held in the meadow's shade. The Sulu Seagrass Beds also hold the quiet labor of bacteria and fungi. the unseen communities that break down fallen leaves and turn dead matter back towards use. Without them, the meadow would choke on its own old growth, but with them, every softened blade becomes part of a slow return. Nutrients move from plant to animal, from animal to sediment, from sediment to root, and then back upward into leaf. The cycle is hidden, but it is the meadow's pulse. Because seagrass plants need light, they tell you something about the clarity of the water above them. When the sea is clear, sunlight can reach deeper, and meadows may extend farther from shore, while cloudy water shortens the zone where leaves can thrive. Sediment, algae blooms, storms, and runoff can all affect that light, though in a calm telling like this, it is enough to feel how precious brightness becomes underwater. Every blade is, in its own quiet way, a measure of clarity. You move over a patch where the seagrass is sparse, and the sand shines more openly, crossed by the delicate tracks of animals traveling at night or early morning. Then the meadow thickens again, the blades rising around you like a low green rain, and the small fish return in greater numbers. This patchiness is natural in many beds, shaped by grazing, sediment, light, storms, growth, and the slow spread of rhizomes beneath the surface. The meadow is not a carpet exactly, but a living mosaic. At times, fresh water from rain and land may touch coastal beds, changing salinity for a while, especially near island shores and shallow embayments. Seagrasses tolerate salt, but each species has its own comfort, its own range of light, burial, water movement, and bottom type. That is why mixed meadows can be so beautiful, because different leaf shapes reveal different solutions to the same gentle question of how to live rooted under the sea. Diversity here is quiet, practical, and beautiful. You may notice that the meadow has a smell in the imagination, not sharp, but green and mineral, like wet leaves, clean sand, and sun-warmed tide. Underwater, smell belongs more to dissolved chemistry than to air, and many animals read the water through senses you cannot fully share. A crab may know food by faint traces moving across its antennae, and a fish may find its way through subtle gradients carried by the current. The meadow speaks chemically, in messages too soft for you to hear, but not too soft to matter. Above, islands of the Sulu archipelago rest in sun and weather, while below, their shallow margins are held by reefs, seagrasses, mangroves, and sandflats. The land gives shape to the water's motion, and the water gives shape to the living edges of the land, wearing rock, moving grains, and laying down quiet deposits. In sheltered places, this exchange can make the kind of floor where seagrass roots take hold, neither too hard nor too unstable. A meadow begins where conditions become kind enough for roots. Kindness, in nature, does not mean softness without change, because these beds know waves, heat, burial, grazing, and seasons of cloudy water. It means that, over time, enough light returns, enough sediment stays, enough shoots survive, and enough living connections remain for the meadow to continue. The patience of this place is made from many recoveries that do not look dramatic from above. To hover here is to feel how resilience can be gentle. A small blue starfish rests partly hidden among the leaves, its arms arranged with the calm geometry of a tide pool dream. Nearby, a shell lies open and empty, already becoming part of the bottom, its edges softened by film and fine sand. Nothing here is wasted, not even emptiness, because empty shells become shelter, hard places for attachment, and pale fragments in the making of future sediment. The sea has a slow talent for returning things. The more slowly you look, the less the meadow seems like scenery, and the more it becomes a community of exchanges. Light becomes leaf, leaf becomes food, food becomes movement. Movement stirs sediment, sediment feeds roots, and roots hold the floor for more leaves. A turtle crossing the bed is part of this, and so is a snail, and so is a single blade wearing its small coat of algae. The whole place is made of relationships, resting inside relationships, like currents folded into currents. You drift now towards a slightly deeper edge, where the sunlight is still present but no longer quite as bright, and the seagrass blades darken to a richer green. The surface seems farther away, though it remains visible, and the meadow below becomes calmer in color, more blue than gold. Fish hold closer to shelter here, and the open patches feel wider, as if the bed is beginning to loosen into the deeper lagoon. The descent continues, but it is a soft descent. At this depth, the leaves move with a slower sway because the surface chop has less force by the time it reaches the bottom. Fine particles hang longer in the water, each one traveling on a path too small and complicated to follow. You can imagine them settling eventually among the roots, where they join older grains and older fragments and become part of the meadow's quiet floor. The bottom is always receiving, always letting the sea lay something down. A juvenile grouper may wake beneath a small coral head at the meadow's edge, mottled and still, with only its fins making tiny corrections. The coral head is not a reef wall, just a low shelter rising from sand. But in this blended habitat, even a small hard structure gathers life. Seagrass blades brush nearby, and the fish can move between leaf cover and coral shade as the day asks. The border between meadow and reef is not a line, but a conversation. In places where seagrass and coral live close together, each habitat changes the feeling of the other. The seagrass can slow sediment before it reaches coral, while coral rubble and reef shapes can soften water enough for seagrass to remain. Fish carry nutrients as they feed and rest in different zones, and the tide moves over all of it with one broad hand. What appears separate on a map becomes blended in the body of the sea. You pause over a clear patch and notice garden eels, or something like them in posture, rising from burrows where the sand is open enough and the current brings food. Their bodies are slender and upright, bending together with the flow, and when the water changes, they lower themselves slowly out of sight. They are not part of the grass, yet they belong to the same sheltered flat, sharing the calmer water made by nearby plants and reef forms. Even the open sand has its residence. The meadow's quietest inhabitants may be those you never see, because they live below the surface of the sediment or inside the tissues of other organisms. Microbes around seagrass roots can influence nutrients and sulfides, shaping whether roots breathe easily or struggle in buried mud. Tiny animals graze the films that grow on leaves, keeping those films from blocking too much light, while becoming food for larger animals in turn. The visible meadow rests on an invisible network. There is comfort in knowing that much of this life continues without display. The meadow does not perform itself for the surface, and most of its work happens below the level of casual sight. A root grows through sand, a larva settles, a blade replaces itself, a turtle grazes and moves on, and the water closes gently over every passing event. The bed keeps no grand record, yet it keeps living. The sun climbs higher above the Sulu Sea, and for a while the water brightens until each blade seems outlined in trembling fire. Warmth gathers in the shallows, and the surface becomes a shining roof, moving so much light that the bottom looks almost patterned with lace. The fish become harder to count, because the meadow itself is now a shifting brightness of leaf and shadow. You let your attention widen, and the whole place becomes radiant. Even in brightness, there is still rest here, because the motion remains slow and the sounds remain muted. Underwater sound travels far, but in this sheltered meadow it arrives softened, as low vibrations, faint clicks, distant snaps from small crustaceans, and the subtle hush of water moving through grass. There is no empty silence in the sea, only layers of sound folded so gently that they can feel like quiet. Listening here is another way of drifting. The snapping sounds of small shrimp may come from hidden places, brief and precise, but they dissolve quickly into the larger hush. Fish make tiny feeding noises. Sand shifts, bubbles release, and your own imagined breath becomes part of the slow rhythm. Nothing demands attention for long, and that is why attention can rest everywhere at once. The meadow teaches a kind of listening that has no edge. A pair of small fish hovers above a sandy opening, rising and lowering with the faint pressure of each passing ripple. One turns slightly, and for a moment its flank carries a stripe of sun like a thread of polished shell. Then both return to their earlier posture, doing almost nothing, which in the sea is often a complete and careful way of being. Stillness here is not absence but balance. You move again, following the direction of the leaning blades, and the meadow seems to guide you without leading anywhere in particular. This is not a path because no path is needed, yet the current gives the body a sense of direction, and the leaves all acknowledge it together. They lean, recover, lean again, writing the tides passing in green strokes across the sand. To follow them is to become part of the meadow's rhythm. A small conch shifts near the base of the plants, pushing itself along with a patient, muscular motion, carrying its shell like a rounded piece of the shore. Around it, the sand is alive with grains lifted and dropped by minute currents, so that even the floor seems to breathe lightly. The conch's track will soften soon, but for now it remains a curved sentence written in pale sediment. The sea writes slowly and erases with kindness. Somewhere above and beyond this bed, rain may be falling over an island, running through soil, roots, and stone before touching the coast. That water may bring nutrients, sediments, and the faint chemical signatures of land, while the sea answers with salt, tide, and its own patient mixing. The health of the meadow depends on these exchanges remaining gentle enough that light can still enter and roots can still breathe. A seagrass bed is marine, but it remembers the shore. Mangroves, where they stand nearby, hold another part of this coastal quiet, their roots filtering water and giving young animals another shelter before the reef and meadow receive them. Leaves falling from mangroves may enter tidal channels, breaking down into detritus that moves through food webs in hidden ways. The seagrass beds are not mangroves and not reefs, and yet all three can belong to one coastal breathing system. Together they make a slow living margin. You turn back toward the meadow's center, where the blades are dense again and the open sand becomes rare. The green closes softly around the view, not like a wall, but like curtains moving in a warm room. Small fish pass through the leaves and vanish, while sunlight arrives in fragments, slipping across their bodies and leaving before the eye can hold it. The world becomes partial, layered, and soothing. There is no need to name every creature, though names can be gentle lanterns when they help you see. Rabbitfish, goby, wrasse, shrimp, crab, sea cucumber, turtle, dugong in possibility, sponge, snail, clam, worm, and starfish all belong in different ways to the seagrass story. Some feed directly on the plants, some feed on what grows upon them, some hide among them, and some pass through as part of wider roots. The meadow is less a list than a gathering. As the tide shifts, the direction of the leaves changes almost imperceptibly, and the whole bed seems to turn its face. Water that had been sliding one way begins to pause and move another, carrying new scents, new particles, and new chances for feeding. Animals respond in small ways, lifting, settling, opening, closing, or moving just enough to meet the changed flow. The tide is the meadow's slow clock. This clock does not tick in hard divisions, but swells and loosens, rises and drains, covers and reveals. In very shallow areas, the upper tips of the grass may come closer to the surface at low tide, while deeper patches remain submerged in the same green calm. Tidal range, moon, wind, and shoreline shape all combine to decide how water rests over the beds. Time here is not counted sharply, but felt. You feel it in the way suspended particles change direction, in the way fish align themselves, and in the way the leaves lean with a new patience. The entire meadow receives the tide without resistance, as though the plants have always known that yielding is a form of endurance. There is something restful in watching a landscape that survives by bending, not by holding itself rigid against the world. The seagrass does not win against the water. It belongs to it. Below the leaves, the sediment is cool-looking and dim, a pale brown and cream foundation made from mineral grains, organic fragments, and time. Roots move through it in branching mats, and around those roots the chemistry can differ from the open water above. Oxygen leaks from living tissues, microbes gather near the roots, and the buried layer becomes a place of exchanges too quiet for ordinary sight. The meadow has a hidden understory. In land forests, we look up for canopies, but here the canopy is low, wavering just above the sand. The tallest leaves create shade for smaller ones, and some species creep near the floor where light still filters through. The vertical world is modest, perhaps only the height of a hand or an arm, Yet for the animals living inside it, that height is a spacious and complicated architecture. Scale changes everything, and the meadow becomes large when you grow quiet enough to enter it. A shrimp no longer than a fingernail can find a whole territory on a single blade, with food along its surface and shelter at its base. A juvenile fish can disappear behind a few leaves, and a snail can spend hours crossing a distance you would pass in a breath. The more you imagine yourself slowing down to their scale, the more immense each gentle movement becomes. The small world is not simple, only nearer. And as you continue to drift, the meadow opens again into a pale channel where the sand is smooth and the current has combed it into faint ripples. The seagrass edges on either side lean inward, and the channel becomes a quiet corridor for animals moving through the bed. A ray might pass here at dusk, stirring the surface of the sand with its wingtips, or a turtle might follow the opening toward another feeding patch. The corridor waits, empty for now, and its emptiness feels welcoming. The sand ripples are made by water repeating itself, touching the bottom in patterns until grains gather into low ridges. Each ridge is small, but together they show how even gentle movement can shape a landscape when it is given enough time. The same is true of the meadow, which shapes water by slowing it, and is shaped by water in return. Nothing here is separate from the long work of motion. In the distance, the blue deepens beyond the shallows, hinting at the wider Sulu Sea with its basins and reefs and darker passages. But the seagrass keeps your attention close to the bottom, close to the leaves, close to the quiet animals that live where sunlight still arrives. The deep ocean may be vast in darkness, but this shallow meadow is vast in detail, in the patient density of small lives. Here, wonder does not descend by depth alone, but by attention. You let yourself settle nearer to the sand without touching it, hovering where the blades rise around you and the water moves past your face. The meadow holds its green hush, and the creatures continue their work, each one carrying on as though your presence is only another passing shadow. Above, the surface shines and trembles. Below, the roots hold, and between them the living leaves sway with the tide. For now, there is only the Sulu seagrass, warm water, slow light, and the soft, endless breathing of the sea. The breathing is there in the smallest spaces, between one blade and another, where the current narrows and the water seems to think before it moves on. A tiny fish noses into that passage, pauses among the green walls, and then slips forward with a little turn of its tail. Around it, the seagrass leaves bend aside and return, not closing like doors, but floating back into the same slow arrangement. The meadow accepts every passage and then becomes itself again. Farther along, the leaves are marked with pale grains caught on their surfaces, and each grain catches the light before falling away. Some of this fine material has drifted from nearby reefs, some has lifted from the floor, and some has arrived from distances too wide to imagine from this quiet place. The meadow sorts it all patiently, slowing the water just enough for particles to settle, while tiny animals search through the softness for what can feed them. Even dust becomes part of the feast. A small crab rests sideways near the base of a chute, its legs folded under its body in a posture of careful waiting. It is the color of sand and old leaf, and it might be overlooked completely until one eye lifts on its stalk and follows the movement of a shadow. When it moves, it does so in short gliding steps that seem almost weightless, as if the water has taken the sharpness out of walking. Then it settles again among the roots, and the scene becomes still. There is a particular kind of calm that belongs to places where many lives are hidden because the eye is asked to soften instead of search. You begin to see by patience, letting shapes appear from the pattern, the way a shell emerges from sand, or a fish becomes visible only after it turns. The meadow is teaching you its pace, and that pace is slower than naming, slower than counting, slower than the quick habit of deciding what matters. Down here, attention becomes gentle. A sea hare may move across a bare patch with a softness that almost resembles a drifting leaf, its body folding and unfolding as it grazes on algae. Its colors belong to the bottom, mottled and quiet, with little frilled edges that break up its outline against the sand. It carries no brightness, no urgency, no need to be noticed, and yet it is perfectly present in its slow work. The meadow holds room for such humble, soft-bodied travelers. Near the leaves, tiny amphipods and copepods cling in numbers too small for a casual glance, and their lives unfold on a scale of droplets and surfaces. They graze, hide, molt, and reproduce among the films that coat the grass, transforming invisible plant growth into animal bodies that larger mouths can find. In this way, the seagrass bed turns sunlight into 1,000 forms of motion, from a grazing speck to a gliding fish. The chain is not a ladder, but a web. The longer you float here, the more the meadow seems made of thresholds, where sunlight becomes green tissue, where sand becomes root space, and where shelter becomes movement. A juvenile fish that rests by day may swim out at dusk, feeding near the edge before returning to the leaves. A shrimp that hides under a blade may rise at night into the water above, while a crab that seemed buried begins to walk with surprising certainty. The bed is always changing its doors. At midday, when the sun stands high, the water over the Sulu Sea can become so clear that distance looks softer rather than farther. The meadow stretches ahead in wavering greens, broken by sand windows and little coral stones, each one hosting its own miniature assembly of grazers and resting fish. Above, the surface trembles with heat and light, and below, the plants make use of that brightness in a manner both ordinary and miraculous. A leaf receives the sun, and the whole bed grows quietly. Photosynthesis is a word with a clean scientific sound, but here it feels like a slow translation from light into shelter. The seagrass captures energy, builds sugars, sends nourishment into roots and rhizomes, and releases oxygen into the water and sediment around it. No single blade explains the meadow, yet each blade participates in this soft conversion that supports animals far beyond the plant itself. What begins as sunlight becomes shade, food, structure, and home. You pass over a place where the leaves are shorter and cropped, with newer growth rising in brighter, tender green. A turtle may have grazed here, or rabbitfish may have fed along the blade surfaces, trimming the meadow in a pattern that will change again as shoots regrow. Grazing does not simply remove life from the bed, because in balanced rhythms it can encourage fresh growth and open space for different small animals. Even feeding can become a form of gardening. The thought of a turtle returns softly, not as a grand arrival, but as a slow, rounded presence somewhere beyond the edge of vision. It may be resting near a coral outcrop, or rising toward the surface to breathe, or drifting back toward the grass with the same calm gravity it brought before. Air and water meet in its life without hurry, and every descent after breathing is a return to the meadow's green table. The turtle belongs both above and below, carrying the surface down with it. You can imagine its shadow moving over the leaves, broad and softened by the water, while small fish pause and then resume their paths. The turtle's flippers stir the current in wide, careful strokes, and the seagrass below bends as if acknowledging an old visitor. It lowers its head, crops the leaves, and lets fragments drift behind, where other grazers and decomposers may find their own portion later. Nothing about this movement feels abrupt, because the meadow has space for slow appetites. In another part of the bed, where the sediment is finer and richer, small bivalves lie beneath the surface, with their siphons barely open. They filter the water quietly, drawing in what the tide brings and returning what they do not need. Around them, worms make soft tunnels, and the sediment becomes aerated in faint, hidden ways that help the whole buried community continue. The floor beneath the grass is not solid sleep, but a low, living murmur. Some worms extend delicate feeding parts into the water or sediment, gathering particles with a patience that would be invisible from above. Others move through the grains, loosening and mixing them, making paths that collapse and reform after their bodies pass. Their work is rarely beautiful in the obvious sense, yet the meadow depends on this buried patience, this slow turning of matter at the edge of sight. A quiet ecosystem is often built by smallness. The seagrass leaves sway above these hidden tunnels, and their shadows travel over the sand in long, soft bands. When the light shifts, the shadows seem almost like animals themselves, stretching, loosening, and slipping away beneath the current. A goby rests partly within one of those moving bands, its eyes lifted, its fins touching the bottom lightly, as if the sand were a thought it did not want to disturb. Then it darts a little and stops again, held by the shade. Goby lives can be close to the floor, close to burrows, close to the textures of sand and shell. Some share spaces with shrimp in other tropical shallows, some rest alone, and many make use of the broken landscape where seagrass meets open sediment. Their bodies are small enough that a root clump, a shell, or a blade shadow can make a meaningful refuge. The meadow's architecture is humble, but for them, it is vast. You drift over a low mound where bits of shell and seagrass litter have gathered, and the water eddies gently behind it. Such small unevenness matters in a flat place because currents sort grains differently around each rise and hollow. Larvae may settle where the flow is favorable, food particles may gather in a lee, and animals may use the slight shelter to pause from the open current. The floor is full of tiny geographies. There is geology even in this softness, though it does not announce itself with cliffs or stone towers. The calcium carbonate grains of old shells and reef fragments mix with mineral sediments and organic remains, becoming the pale foundation through which roots travel. Over years and longer spans, storms may move sand from one patch to another, while calmer seasons let plants hold it again in place. The meadow is a landscape shaped by gentle forces repeating. Sometimes a storm far away can send swell into the region, and even sheltered beds feel the heavier pulse moving through them. Leaves bend lower, particles lift, and the water that was clear becomes dimmer for a while, as though the meadow has drawn a thin curtain across itself. Yet after the disturbance settles, the plants may stand again, and animals resume their ordinary routes through the changed sand. Recovery here is not a dramatic return, but a gradual rebalancing. A broken blade drifts past you, turning slowly as it rises and sinks in the same small motion. It may lodge against other leaves, become food for microbes, or travel outward toward a different habitat where its stored energy enters another part of the coastal web. Even a fragment leaving the meadow is not leaving the story, because water carries matter across boundaries that seem firm only to us. In the sea, departure is often another kind of joining. The Sulu Seagrass Beds are touched by islands, reefs, channels, and the open breathing of a warm marginal sea, so their life is never isolated. Larvae drift from reef fish, invertebrates release eggs and sperm into water, and currents carry the beginnings of animals toward places where they may settle. Some find the grass, some find sand, some find coral, and many become food for others before they ever become visible. The meadow receives what the water offers with patience. You can feel that patience in the way every animal seems to move with its own small clock. A snail crosses a blade according to the pace of scraping, a fish turns according to the pulse of light and current, and a sea cucumber feeds according to the long appetite of sediment. No one rhythm dominates the bed, but together they make a layered tempo, slower than thought and steadier than sleep. The meadow is a place where time becomes soft. A little farther on, the seagrass grows in mixed heights, taller ribbons rising above low oval leaves that lie close to the sand. This layering gives the bed a textured surface, so that the current combs over it unevenly, and small animals find different rooms at different levels. The taller leaves collect light and motion, the shorter leaves create miniature shelter near the floor, and roots below bind the whole arrangement into one living mat. Variety becomes shelter. The broad leaves may belong to species that thrive in slightly calmer or deeper sand, while the narrow runners may colonize open patches more quickly. Each species has a way of holding the bottom, reproducing and recovering, so mixed meadows can carry several strategies at once. If one patch thins, another may persist, and if the light changes, the balance among leaves can shift slowly through time. The meadow adapts without losing its calm. Occasionally, seagrass flowers rise or release their pollen into water, because these are true plants with a lineage that once knew air. Their blossoms are not showy in the way land flowers are showy, because underwater pollination asks for other solutions, quieter and more hidden. Some release thread-like pollen that travels with currents, seeking receptive flowers in the swaying meadow. Even reproduction here is carried by water. Seeds may settle in sediment, resting until conditions allow growth, while rhizomes continue the more familiar spread of shoots across the bottom. In this way, the meadow has both memory and reach, both buried possibility and living expansion. A seed is a small future held in darkness, and a rhizome is a present connection extending through sand. Together, they let the bed continue its unfolding. You hover above a cluster of leaves where tiny bubbles shine again, almost motionless until the current releases them upward. They rise slowly through the green, gathering into the brighter water above, each one turning light into a trembling silver bead. The bubbles are small, but they make the whole meadow feel alive in a visible way, as though the plants were whispering through the water. The whisper is not sound, but oxygen. Animals take that oxygen in many forms, through gills, tissues, and the dissolved exchanges that connect body to sea. A fish opens its mouth and passes water across delicate surfaces, while a worm breathes in the sediment, and a crab draws water over hidden gills beneath its shell. Breathing is usually private on land, but underwater it feels woven into the whole environment, because every breath has already moved through water shared by others. The meadow's life is a shared exchange. The light begins to lower again as afternoon leans toward evening and the green of the bed deepens, becoming less golden and more blue. Shadows stretch farther between the leaves, and fish that were scattered begin to gather in places where shelter is thicker. The change is subtle at first, a soft cooling of color rather than a clear event. Yet every creature seems to know that the day is turning. The meadow listens to light. A small school of juvenile fish settles near a dense patch, their bodies angled slightly into the current. They hold together loosely, not pressed close, but aware of one another in the water's shared pressure. When one shifts, the others adjust with the smoothness of fabric lifting in a breeze, and the group becomes one larger, gentler body. Their silver sides briefly catch the fading sun, then fold back into green. In the dimming water, patterns become more important than detail, and the meadow's camouflage grows stronger. Stripes align with blades, mottled shells match the floor, and transparent bodies become nearly impossible to separate from the moving background. This is not concealment, as fear alone, but concealment as belonging, as the art of letting one's body speak the same visual language as the place. To be hidden here is to be included. The seagrass bed takes on a calmer shade, and the surface above loses its bright, broken coins. Soon, the first nocturnal movements will begin again, but for now the meadow rests in the interval between day and night. Such intervals are especially gentle underwater, because the change arrives through color and temperature and animal posture, rather than through sudden darkness. Evening enters by degrees. A hermit crab begins to move across a sandy opening, carrying a borrowed shell that fits well enough for now. Its legs test the bottom one after another, and its antennae read the water ahead like fingers touching a curtain. When it reaches the shelter of the grass, it pauses beneath a blade, and the shell becomes just another pale curve among many pale fragments. The borrowed home blends into the meadow's litter. Empty shells are common in such places, but they are not only remains because they become resources for those still living. A shell can house a hermit crab, anchor a sponge, shelter a small fish, or break into sand that later cradles roots. The boundary between body and landscape is softened by time, as structures made for one life become surfaces and sediments for others. The sea is always translating. A sponge may grow on a hard fragment near the meadow edge, filtering water with quiet persistence. Its body is simple in outline, yet intricate inside, a living system of channels that draws the sea through itself and removes small particles from the flow. Nearby, hydroids or tiny colonial animals may rise like delicate threads from a shell, each one adding another form of still feeding to the scene. The meadow includes not only plants and swimmers, but filters. These filter feeders remind you that food does not always look like food in the ocean. It may arrive as a drifting speck, a dissolved trace, a planktonic cell, or a small organic flake loosened from a leaf. Where water moves, nourishment passes, and where bodies are shaped to receive it, the current itself becomes a slow meal. Feeding can be as quiet as waiting. As night settles more fully, the meadow becomes a place of touch and scent and vibration. The fish that depend on sight draw closer to cover, while animals, guided by chemical trails and antennae, begin to travel more openly through the grass. Shrimp step out from hidden hollows, and crabs pick their way between roots, their bodies no longer softened by bright overhead light. The bed does not become empty with darkness, it becomes different. A faint luminous sparkle appears again when something stirs the water, not everywhere, not constantly, but in brief scattered points. Each spark is tiny, and yet the darkness makes it feel spacious, like a message from the water's own nervous system. The glow fades at once, leaving no trail except in memory, and the meadow returns to shadow with its leaves still moving. Light in darkness feels tender here. Above the seagrass, the night water may hold larval animals rising from the bottom or drifting in from elsewhere, part of the daily vertical and horizontal movements that animate coastal seas. Some are so transparent they seem almost imaginary, little bodies with beating appendages, eye spots, spines, or shells still forming. They travel with currents more than choice, though their tiny behaviors can influence where they remain in the water. The meadow beneath them waits as one possible future. Many larvae will never settle here, and many will feed other animals, but some may find the right texture, chemistry, light, and shelter. A young snail may begin life on a surface no wider than a leaf, while a juvenile fish may grow among blades before moving outward. The bed is not only where lives are lived, but where many lives begin their more visible forms. It is a cradle made of grass. The word cradle suits the meadow because it holds without closing, sheltering young animals while still allowing water to pass freely through. There are no walls here, only leaves, roots, shadows, and the broken patterns of light that make it harder for any one body to stand out. In that gentle complexity, small lives gain time, and time is one of the most precious gifts in the sea. To grow is to be given minutes, days, seasons. You drift in the night meadow with no need to see far, because nearness has become enough. A blade passes close to your hand, then another, and the water between them feels warm and dark and lightly textured with suspended life. Somewhere ahead, a fish turns in its sleep-like hovering, and somewhere below, a worm continues through sediment without knowing the shape of the sky. The world is full, but quietly full. The Sulu Sea itself lies beyond this small circle, with deeper basins where the light disappears, and other lives carry their own lanterns. Yet here in the seagrass, the darkness is shallower and more intimate. Not the deep ocean's black distance, but a coastal night wrapped around rooted plants. The meadow is close to islands, close to reefs, close to air, and still it has its own inward mystery. Shallow water can also feel ancient. It feels ancient because the processes are old, older than any one meadow, and older than the islands in their present shapes. Plants return to the sea across evolutionary time, reefs built and broken, built again, currents shifted with climate and coastlines, and animals found ways to live in the green shelter of tidal shallows. The scene before you is temporary, but the pattern behind it reaches far back. In this softness, there is history. Moonlight, if it reaches the surface, enters the water as a pale and wavering trace. It cannot fill the meadow the way sunlight does, but it can silver the upper edges of leaves and outline the slow passing of larger shapes. A turtle rising to breathe may cross that faint brightness, or a fish near the surface may turn and vanish into darker water. The night keeps most things hidden and hides them gently. The plants breathe through the darkness, using stored energy while waiting for morning's return. Microbes continue their work in sediment, animals feed and rest, and the current carries away what must be carried while bringing what will be received. A meadow is never inactive, even when it appears deeply still, because stillness in nature often means movement too small or too continuous to separate. The quiet is made of process. You sense the tide changing once more, perhaps beginning to rise, perhaps beginning to fall, though in this drifting state direction matters less than rhythm. The leaves answer first, their lean shifting slowly until the bed seems to inhale from another side. Fine particles lift and turn, and a crab changes its path to meet the new current along the base of the grass. The whole meadow adjusts without announcement. At low tide in the shallowest places, some beds may come close to exposure, their leaves lying flatter beneath thinner water. At higher tide, fish from nearby areas can enter more freely, and the meadow becomes a broader corridor of feeding and shelter. These changes are not interruptions, but the ordinary breathing of the coastal edge, a daily expansion and contraction shaped by moon and shoreline. The seagrass belongs to this pulse. Even when you cannot see the shore, it is present in the sediment, in the nutrients, and in the protected shape of the water. The islands around the Sulu Sea soften some waves and concentrate others, creating coves, channels, and shelves where particular communities take hold. A seagrass bed is not placed randomly. It is the visible result of many quiet conditions agreeing for a while. Its existence is a kind of meeting. The meeting includes clear enough water, shallow enough depth, suitable bottom, gentle enough disturbance, and the arrival of plant fragments or seeds able to root. It also includes animals that graze without removing too much, microbes that recycle nutrients, and neighboring habitats that share species across the coastal mosaic. When all these things remain within livable ranges, the meadow persists, widening and thinning through seasons. Balance here is not fixed, but living. Near dawn, the darkness begins to pale before the sun is visible from below. The change is almost imperceptible at first, just a loosening of black into blue, and then a faint green returning to the leaves. No creature announces it, yet bodies respond, with night travelers withdrawing and day feeders stirring in the softened light. Morning comes like a thought rising through water. A shrimp slips backward into cover, its transparent body catching one last glint before it disappears among the bases of the grass. A small fish that spent the night sheltered in the meadow moves outward toward a feeding route, pausing at the edge as though reading the new day. The leaves brighten slowly, and the seagrass begins again the work that only light allows. Everything resumes, though nothing truly stopped. In the early light, the meadow's colors are cooler than at noon, with greens shaded by blue and sand tinted softly gray. Tiny suspended particles glow when they pass through the first bright shafts, then vanish into shadow. The whole bed seems to wake by becoming more visible, not more active, as if the life was always there and only your seeing had changed. Visibility is not the same as presence. A line of rabbitfish moves through the grass, their mouths testing surfaces as they pass. They graze with small, repeated motions, taking algae and plant material, helping transfer the meadow's growth into mobile bodies that may later carry energy beyond the bed. Their group shape lengthens and compresses around denser patches, adapting to the meadow the way water adapts to stone. Feeding becomes flow. Nearby, a wrasse picks quickly but smoothly among the leaves, searching for tiny animals disturbed by the morning movement. Its colors, muted under the water's green filter, appear and disappear as it turns through bands of light. The fish is active, but not frantic, held within the steady hush of the bed and the broad calm of the warm sea. Even searching can feel unhurried. The seagrass itself bears the marks of many such interactions, because leaves are grazed, scraped, shaded, cleaned, broken, and renewed. A perfect blade is not more meaningful than a scarred one, since both are part of the meadow's ongoing life. Each nick or pale stripe tells of an animal mouth, a passing grain, a film of algae, or the simple aging of tissue in salt water. The meadow wears its history in green. You move over a dense stand, where the long leaves rise high enough to conceal the floor almost completely. Inside this stand, the water is slightly slower, and the light is fragmented into narrow moving pieces that travel across hidden sand. Small animals shelter there because the world is divided into many angles, and a body can vanish by aligning itself with just a few leaves. Complexity becomes comfort. For a juvenile fish, this green complexity may mean the difference between constant exposure and a more forgiving early life. It can feed on tiny crustaceans, retreat among blades, and learn the patterns of tide and light while growing large enough for wider habitats. The meadow is a school of water, shadow, and movement, teaching without intention. To live here is to learn the grammar of currents. A pipefish appears again, or perhaps this is another one, thin as a drifting stem and almost comically delicate once you finally see it. It moves with small, thin vibrations rather than obvious strokes, keeping its body upright among the blades and letting resemblance protect it. Its long snout is suited to tiny prey, and its stillness is suited to the meadow's broken green light. Some creatures survive by becoming subtle. Subtlety is everywhere in the Sulu Seagrass Beds, in the clear shrimp, the sand-colored crabs, the buried clams, and the fish whose stripes dissolve among leaves. The place rewards quiet forms of attention, the kind that does not demand a spectacle before it feels wonder. You begin to understand that a meadow like this is not empty because it is calm, and not simple because it is shallow. Its richness is hushed. A soft current carries you toward a patch where seagrass litter has gathered in a low tangle. Fallen leaves, some green, some brown, are caught against living shoots and shell pieces, beginning their slow transformation into detritus. Tiny decomposers and grazers will work through this material, and fragments will lift away when the tide changes, feeding other mouths in other corners. Decay here is not an ending, but a turning. This turning is one of the meadow's quiet powers, because the dead plant matter supports food webs that do not rely only on direct grazing. Microbes soften and enrich it, small invertebrates feed upon it, and fish feed upon them, carrying the energy into bodies that swim beyond the grass. The meadow therefore nourishes the sea not only by standing alive, but by letting pieces of itself return. Loss becomes nourishment. You pass a small mound of sediment, where seagrass roots have trapped drifting grains, building the bottom upward by tiny increments. In some places, beds can stabilize shorelines and reduce erosion by calming water and holding sediment, though here, that service feels less like a function and more like a long gesture of steadiness. The plants do not know they are protecting anything, yet their bodies change the movement of water. Root by root, they make shelter. The idea of shelter widens as you drift, because it is not only the shelter of one fish from one larger mouth, it is shelter for sediment from too much motion, for larvae from empty water, for carbon from quick return, and for entire coastal mosaics that need quiet places between reef and shore. A seagrass bed shelters processes as well as creatures. It gives the coast a place to breathe. The morning grows brighter, and the meadow begins to shine in more familiar colors. Greens warm, sand brightens, and the water above becomes a clear blue pane through which sunlight keeps arriving in slow waves. Fish move farther from cover now, though never completely away from the possibility of return. Every journey in the meadow seems to include an invisible thread back to refuge. A small ray may appear at the edge of the grass, gliding low over the sand with its body flattened into the water's own shape. It does not disturb much, only lifts a faint breath of sediment as it passes, and the particles settle behind it like pale smoke. Its movement is so smooth that it seems less like swimming than remembering a path. The ray crosses the opening and fades into blue. Where rays feed, they may reveal buried animals, turning over small patches of sand, and briefly changing the surface of the bottom. These disturbances can create opportunities for other creatures, because loosened sediment exposes food and makes new textures for settlement. In a meadow, even a passing body can become a small event in the lives of many others. The landscape is altered by touch. You drift over the place where the ray passed, and already the suspended sand is falling back. The tracks soften, the water clears, and the seagrass at the edge resumes its slow leaning, as if nothing unusual has happened. The sea's gentleness is often in this capacity to receive movement, and then fold it into continuity. A mark appears, changes, and becomes quiet. The farther you follow the bed, the more you notice that it has moods without drama. Clear morning, bright noon, dim evening, breathing night, springtide, neap tide, calm season, windy season. Each one gives the meadow a different texture. Yet beneath these changes, the basic gestures remain familiar. Leaves rising, currents passing, animals feeding, sediment settling. The meadow's calm is not sameness, but continuity. Continuity is what lets the creatures trust the place enough to return. Turtles revisit feeding grounds, fish move along known edges, small invertebrates occupy stable patches, and roots persist beneath leaves that may be lost and replaced. The individual details change, but the pattern remains recognizable, like a song played softly through different weather. In that pattern, life finds orientation. You rest again above a dense green hollow, where the blades lean over an open pocket of sand. Within it, a tiny fish faces outward, almost motionless, except for the beating of its gills and the smallest adjustments of its fins. It has chosen a place where light is broken, water is slow, and escape routes are many, though none of this looks calculated from the outside. The meadow offers possibilities, and bodies answer with habit. Habit, in an ecosystem, is not dullness, but the wisdom of repeated success. The same routes are used because they lead through food and shelter. The same times are favored because light and tide make them livable. And the same structures are chosen because they have held before. Over generations, these habits become the shape of the community, written not in words, but in movement. The meadow remembers through behavior. A blade brushes another blade, and the sound, if you could isolate it, would be almost nothing. Yet multiplied across a field of leaves, the contact becomes part of the underwater hush, a texture in the broader murmur of current and animal life. The sea is not silent, but its sounds have no hard corners here, only softened clicks, distant pulses, and the low impression of water moving through grass. The meadow speaks in murmurs. That murmur can feel like the sound inside a shell held to the ear, except it surrounds you completely. It is not a story with a beginning and end, but a continuous presence, the acoustic shadow of many small lives going on together. As you listen, your own sense of time loosens, and the meadow's repeating motions become enough to hold awareness. There is no need to arrive anywhere else. Only the slow continuation of water through grass, and the easy knowledge that every blade is moving because something larger is moving around it. You remain suspended within that motion, neither pushing forward nor holding back, while the Sulu meadow spreads beneath you in soft, uneven greens. The surface above glows with daylight, but the bed itself has a shaded intimacy, a closeness made from leaves, roots, shells, and all the small lives that prefer not to be seen too clearly. In this nearness, even the open sea feels gentle. A little farther ahead, the seagrass thins around a patch of coral rubble, where old pieces of reef lie pale and rounded among the shoots. Some fragments are bare, while others hold films of algae, tiny sponges, and little animals that have found a hard place in an otherwise yielding world. The rubble gives the meadow another kind of texture, and fish use it as a stopping point between the soft leaves and the brighter, harder reef beyond. It is a small island of stone inside the grass. Around these fragments, cleaner shrimp and other delicate crustaceans may hide in crevices, their antennae extending into the water like fine white threads. Small fish come near and turn slowly, not in ceremony but in the ordinary mutual arrangements of coastal life, where one animal's patience can become another's brief relief. Even here, among rubble no higher than your hand, the seagrass bed gathers relationships that would be easy to miss from the surface. The small, hard place becomes a quiet station. The reef, though not far away, remains only an influence for now, a brighter suggestion at the edge of the green. Its fish wander in and out of the meadow, and the meadow's young fish may later join the reef. So both places exchange lives the way neighboring rooms exchange light, through an open doorway. Between them lies this mixed floor of sand, grass, shells, and coral pieces, where no single habitat claims the whole scene. The boundary is a soft blending. You drift along that blending edge, and the colors shift with each subtle change in bottom. Sand gives back a pale glow, coral rubble makes broken shadows, and seagrass gathers the light into green bands that ripple with the current. A fish with a yellow tail appears and then vanishes behind a cluster of leaves, and after it disappears, the leaves keep moving as if no entrance or exit has occurred. The meadow lets appearances rise and fade. The science of this place is hidden inside the beauty, because every color and texture comes from a condition the organisms have learned to use. Light must be strong enough for seagrass, but not so harsh or unstable that sediment constantly buries the leaves, and the water must bring nutrients without becoming too cloudy. The bottom must be loose enough for roots, but not so loose that every tide pulls them free. Life here rests on many quiet balances. Seagrass roots need oxygen in sediments that can sometimes become chemically difficult, especially where fine organic matter gathers and decay uses what oxygen is available. The plants answer by moving oxygen down from their leaves into buried tissues, creating small zones where roots and microbes can continue their exchanges. This hidden movement of breath into sand is one of the meadow's most remarkable acts, though nothing about it looks dramatic from above. The blade in the light is also helping the root in the dark. Around those roots, some microbes transform nitrogen, sulfur, and carbon compounds in ways that support the whole system. Their work belongs to chemistry more than visible motion, but without it the meadow would not feel so quietly complete. A plant grows because light feeds it, but also because buried partnerships help keep the sediment livable around its roots. The green surface depends on a hidden alchemy. A tiny burrow opens near the base of a shoot, its rim strengthened by grains and fragments gathered around it. You do not see the animal inside, only the sign of its presence, and that is often how the meadow offers its residence to you. A mark, a hole, a lifted grain, a broken edge, a blade bitten cleanly across, each one says that life has passed here or stayed here. The bed is full of evidence. There is comfort in evidence that does not demand an answer. You can let a track remain a track, and let a burrow remain a doorway into a body you do not need to name. The seagrass meadow is not less beautiful because some of its lives remain unknown. If anything, the unrecognized forms make the whole place feel wider and more forgiving. Wonder can rest without solving everything. A small shellfish opens slightly beneath the sand, and water moves through it in a measured, private rhythm. It filters particles, suspended above the bottom, drawing nourishment from what the tide carries, while remaining almost completely hidden from the brighter world. Beside it, the roots of seagrass hold the grains in place, and above it, the leaves slow the flow enough for particles to linger. Every layer supports another, and another, in quiet alignment. Somewhere nearby, a juvenile snapper rests with others among the blades. Not yet the fuller-bodied fish it may become in deeper or more open habitat. Its young life is shaped by cover, by small prey, and by the protective confusion of moving grass, where a quick turn can erase it from view. Later, if it grows, it may travel farther out, carrying the meadow's early nourishment into reef channels and beyond. The seagrass gives the larger sea some of its future. That future is not guaranteed in any single body, because the sea is full of exchanges, losses, feedings, and returns. Yet the meadow works by abundance and repetition, by offering shelter again and again to many young lives, some of which will carry the pattern outward. A bed like this is not only a place where animals live now, but a place that helps make the next shape of the nearby sea. It is a nursery made of leaves. The word nursery might make you think of protection alone, but protection here is active, textured, and constantly renewed. Blades grow, break, and regrow. Roots stabilize sand, small prey gather on leaf surfaces, and the water moves through it all, bringing oxygen, larvae, plankton, and scent. Young animals do not find safety in still walls, but in a living complexity that shifts with every tide. Shelter is a moving pattern. You move through a stand where the leaves are long enough to brush one another in slow arcs, and the light beneath them is dim and green. A cluster of tiny fish hangs there, each one suspended at a slightly different height, as though the water has placed them carefully in layers. When you drift closer, they ease away rather than scatter, sliding through openings that close behind them only because the leaves continue swaying. Their disappearance feels like water. The meadow has many ways of making things disappear. A crab becomes sand by staying low, a pipefish becomes grass by staying thin, a shrimp becomes light by being transparent, and a buried clam becomes almost nothing but two small openings. Even movement can disappear when it follows the same direction as the current. To live here often means joining the place so completely that the eye has to become patient. Patience changes what you notice next. You begin to see the leaf edges, some smooth and intact, others frayed into soft threads where age and grazing have opened them. You see the tiny brown and golden films on surfaces, the speckled shadows of particles drifting down, and the delicate color differences between new shoots and old leaves. The meadow is not one green, but many greens layered into time. New growth may rise from the base of a shoot, brighter and more tender. while the older length above carries marks of its days in the water. A leaf can be both living and becoming food, both photosynthetic tissue and future detritus, both shelter now and sediment later. This double life gives the meadow a feeling of continuous return, as though nothing here is held too tightly in one form. The leaf is always becoming. Along the floor, fallen leaves gather in dim pockets where the current has less strength. Their surfaces soften, darken, and host bacteria, fungi, and small grazers, until the original blade is no longer just plant material, but a whole miniature feeding ground. Fish may nose through these pockets, and shrimp may work through them at night, while the sediment beneath receives the finer remains. The meadow feeds through freshness and through decay. Decay in warm, shallow water can be swift, but in places where organic matter becomes buried and oxygen is low, some carbon may remain stored in the sediment for longer spans. Seagrass beds are known for this quiet ability to hold carbon below the surface, not as a spectacle, but as the result of roots, slow water, trapped particles, and buried plant remains. The process is invisible while you hover above it, yet it helps make the meadow more than a temporary green skin. Beneath the leaves, the bed keeps a record. That record is layered with old roots, shell grains, leaf fragments, and fine sediments carried by tides across many seasons. It may be disturbed by storms, grazers, burrowing animals, or shifting channels, but still, it gathers where the meadow persists. Each layer belongs to a different moment of water and growth, though the boundaries are too subtle for an ordinary glance. The bottom is a soft archive written in sand. You follow a narrow depression where the grass is shorter and the water seems to move a little faster. Perhaps currents often pass through this line, combing the sediment and limiting the tallest growth. Or perhaps animals have grazed and crossed here repeatedly. The meadow is full of such slight variations, each one revealing how shape emerges from repetition rather than design. A path can be made by motion. The depression leads toward a broader opening, where the bottom is pale and gently rippled. Small fish hover at the edge of the grass, reluctant to cross the brightness without reason, while a few bolder individuals move into the open and turn back. The open sand is not empty, but it offers less cover, so everybody there seems more visible, more clearly outlined by light. Exposure in this meadow is simply the absence of green. Yet even open sand has its quiet residence, and if you look carefully, you may see the faint outline of a buried animal beneath the surface. A flounder or sole-like fish can lie nearly flat, its pattern matching the bottom so well that only the eyes reveal it. Tiny puffs of sediment lift when it adjusts its body, and then the pale surface closes around the shape again. The sand also knows how to hide. A little plume of sediment rises from a hole and drifts sideways, meaning some hidden animal has shifted or expelled sand from its burrow. The plume catches sunlight, becomes a golden cloud for a moment, and then thins until it is just water again. Such tiny events are the weather of the meadow floor, small local changes that matter intensely to those living within centimeters of them. The bed has its own clouds. Beyond the opening, the seagrass returns in a different texture, lower and more delicate, with small oval leaves spread close to the substrate. These species often form fine carpets where light reaches well and the bottom is suitable, their leaves less like ribbons and more like little green coins. Small grazers move across them, and the open spaces between leaves give tiny animals a patchwork of exposure and cover. This, too, is seagrass, though it speaks in a smaller shape. The variety of leaf forms makes the meadow feel like a garden shaped by water rather than by hands. Long blades wave in taller stands, rounded leaves lie low, thin runners stitch open patches, and broad straps rise where the sediment and light allow them. Each form creates a different flow, different shade, different surfaces for epiphytes, and different refuges for animals. The meadow's architecture is written in leaves. A small snail travels across one of the rounded leaves, and its path is so slow that the movement nearly vanishes unless you look away and return. It grazes at the microscopic growth on the surface, cleaning and feeding at once, though not with any purpose beyond its own living. Behind it, the leaf remains part of the plant, part of the snail's root, and part of the larger bed's exchange. A single surface can be shared by many needs. Sharing is not always gentle in the sentimental sense, because one creature's food is another creature's body or shelter. Yet in the meadow, these exchanges are softened by the scale and steadiness of the place, and by the way, every loss becomes material for something else. A bitten blade regrows, a broken shell shelters, a fallen leaf feeds, and a hiding place opens when an animal moves away. The system is not kind like a person, but it is generous in its continuities. You drift again toward the denser grass, where the low leaves give way to longer ribbons moving in the same slow direction. The transition is gradual, and for several meters the two forms overlap, creating a layered space with open floor below and a waving canopy above. Small fish move between these layers, sometimes near the sand, sometimes just under the leaf tips, depending on light and current. The bed becomes a vertical home. A juvenile parrotfish may pass through this mixed area, its colors softened by youth and water, its beak-like mouth testing surfaces for algae. Later in life, such fish may graze more visibly on reef surfaces, helping shape coral communities by removing algal growth. But here it is, simply a small resident moving through shelter. Its path links the meadow to the reef in the most ordinary way, through feeding and growth. The connection is alive. The Sulu Sea's shallow habitats often sit close enough that animals need not belong to only one of them. A fish can sleep in one place, feed in another, and grow through several habitats before reaching its adult pattern. Seagrass, mangrove, reef, sandflat, and lagoon become chapters in a life rather than separate worlds. The coast is a braided story. You float over a place where the water feels slightly cooler, perhaps because a deeper channel sends a gentle movement through the meadow. The leaves lean differently there, and the suspended particles travel in longer, steadier lines. Small fish face into the flow, using it to bring scent and food toward them, while crabs remain lower where the current is softer. Every subtle change in water becomes a change in behavior. Currents are the meadow's invisible landscape. They shape where particles settle, where larvae arrive, where leaves bend, where sediment stays, and where animals prefer to wait. Unlike hills or stones, currents cannot be seen directly, but their presence is written in every leaning blade and every ripple on the sand. You read them by their effects. A narrow band of clearer water passes through, and for a moment the bed looks sharper, each leaf outlined against the pale bottom. Then a slight cloud of fine sediment arrives, softening the outlines and making the world more dreamlike again. The meadow does not need perfect clarity to be beautiful, though it does need enough light to continue growing. Beauty here is not sharpness, but soft visibility. With the changing light, the fish also change their distances. Some venture farther into the open when the glare is reduced, while others tuck into the thickest grass as shadows lengthen. A crab climbs partway up a blade, then lowers itself again, perhaps deciding the current is not right or the surface not useful. These small decisions fill the meadow, though none of them announces itself as important. Importance, in a place like this, is cumulative. One crab's step may not matter much to the eye, but thousands of small feedings, scrapings, burrows, grazings, and exhalations shape the living bed over time. The meadow is made not by single grand events, but by the steady addition of tiny acts. What is quiet can still be immense. You come near another edge, where the grass meets a darker patch of algae-covered rock. The rock holds its own community, with encrusting life pressed close to the surface, and small fish using holes and overhangs. Seagrass leaves brush the rock whenever the current leans them that way, and fragments of algae drift into the meadow, while detritus from the grass may lodge against the stone. Even surfaces of different kinds exchange offerings. On the rock, little urchins may shelter in crevices by day, their spines making a dark, careful outline. At night, they may move more openly to graze, adding another rhythm to the meadow edge, another set of marks on algae and hard surface. Their presence gives texture to the transition from soft-bottom meadow to reef-like hardness, reminding you that ecosystems often overlap in quiet gradients. The edge is not a cut, but a meeting. A damselfish hovers close to the rock, darting out and returning with a quickness that still feels contained by the water's hush. Its territory may be small, but within that smallness it knows every opening, every shelter, every usable angle. The seagrass nearby provides a softer extension of that space, a green margin where other food and refuge are available. The fish lives at the border. Borders are especially rich in shallow seas because they give animals choices. A body can move from hard cover to soft cover, from bright sand to shaded grass, from feeding ground to resting place, and from open current to shelter. The more choices a landscape offers, the more ways life can arrange itself within it. The Sulu Seagrass Beds are full of such choices. You drift back into the grass, and the water grows quieter again, as if the leaves have absorbed the edge's busier texture. Here the current is slowed, and suspended grains move with a more leisurely fall. A small group of fish rests nearly motionless, angled into the flow, while a snail's shell catches one brief spark of sunlight below them. The meadow returns to its hush. This hush is not fragile in the sense of being easily broken by any small movement, because movement is part of it. A fish can pass, a turtle can graze, a ray can stir the sand, and the meadow can fold each event into its ongoing rhythm. But the hush depends on conditions remaining within the range that seagrass can bear, especially light, water quality, and the physical steadiness of the bottom. Peace, here, is a living condition. In the mind, you can feel how the meadow might thin if water became too cloudy for too long, or if the sediment shifted beyond what roots could hold. Yet this thought does not need to become alarm, because the present scene is still here, moving around you, asking only to be noticed with care. To understand vulnerability can deepen gentleness without sharpening the tone. The meadow's quiet is worth attention. A green turtle appears again in imagination, not necessarily visible now, but held by the signs of grazing and the wide calm of the place. It rises from another patch, lifts its head, and lets a ribbon of leaf drift from its mouth before the current carries it away. Its shell is patterned like old stone in shallow light, and its movements are as slow as if the day has no edge. The meadow has time for breath. When the turtle moves toward the surface, it crosses layers of brightness and leaves the grass below to continue without it. At the surface, it takes air from the world above, then returns to the water that holds its weight so gently. That simple crossing between air and sea has happened for countless turtles over countless meadows, always ordinary, always graceful. Breath becomes a bridge between worlds. Below, the seagrass keeps swaying, indifferent to being watched, yet deeply changed by the grazers that visit it. Cropped patches may grow back with tender shoots, and different animals may use those shorter areas than use the taller stands. The turtle's feeding becomes a pattern in the landscape, a kind of temporary clearing made without violence or haste. Grazing writes a soft signature. You follow one of these cropped patches and notice how the young leaves appear brighter, almost luminous, against the older growth around them. Small fish move over the open area, picking at exposed surfaces, while invertebrates adjust to the new arrangement of shade and flow. Even a small change in leaf height changes how water moves and how light reaches the bottom. The meadow is responsive at every scale. Scale keeps shifting as you drift, from the body of a turtle to the mouthparts of a copod, from the island-sheltered Sulu Sea to a single-root hare in sediment. None of these scales cancels the others, and together they make the bed feel both intimate and expansive. You are floating in a place where a tiny grazing mark and a regional current belong to the same slow system. The sea holds many sizes at once. A long, narrow fish rests among the blades nearly parallel to them, its body lined with the direction of growth and water. It may be a young barracuda or another slender hunter using stillness as part of its life, though in this calm telling, it is simply one more shape held in place. Its presence does not disturb the meadow's peace, because even watchfulness can be quiet. The water gathers every posture. Small fish nearby keep their distance, but they do not vanish completely, because the grass gives them many possible routes. A leaf, a shadow, an angle, a quick turn, all of these are part of the meadow's protective language. The larger fish remain suspended, and the smaller ones remain aware, while the tide continues through all of them. Tension dissolves into balance. Balance is not the absence of feeding or being fed upon, but the ongoing arrangement that lets the whole community continue. The seagrass grows, grazers eat, small animals shelter, larger animals pass through, and decomposers return what falls. Nothing here needs to be frozen to remain peaceful. Peace is the continuity of motion without hurry. The afternoon light begins to soften again, and the meadow takes on that familiar deepening green. You have passed through morning, brightness, edge, shadow, and return, yet the bed feels less like a route than a single long breath taken from different angles. Every place you drift over seems connected to every other by roots below and water above. The meadow is one body with many textures. In that body, the rhizomes spread horizontally through the sediment, linking shoots that may appear separate from above. A patch of leaves may therefore be part of the same plant system, connected beneath the sand in ways the eye cannot follow. This hidden connection lets resources move, and new shoots rise, helping the meadow endure small losses at the surface. What appears many may also be one. At the same time, seeds, seedlings, and separate patches make the meadow genetically and physically varied, so it is not one organism alone. It is a community of plants, species, clones, animals, microbes, and sediments, each contributing to the whole without being swallowed by it. The bed's unity is not sameness, but relationship, and relationship is always more spacious than a single form. The meadow is together. A small fish slips past your shoulder and into the grass, leaving only a quiver in the leaves behind it. The quiver travels outward, touches other blades, and disappears into the larger motion of the tide. This is how events vanish here, not by being erased instantly, but by being absorbed into broader rhythms that were already moving. The sea makes room for everything. The water is dimmer now, but not dark, and the surface above holds the last warm light in broken silver. The meadow below seems calmer with every minute, though it remains alive with the preparations of evening. Day fish seek shelter, night feeders begin to stir, and the color of the grass slips from bright green into something deeper and more secret. Dusk gathers softly in the leaves. A crab emerges earlier than the others, testing the sand with delicate feet before committing to the open. Its shell is patterned with the colors of sediment, and its movements are careful enough to seem thoughtful, though they arise from senses tuned to water, scent, and touch. It pauses beside a fallen blade, turns it slightly, and finds something there worth eating. Evening begins with small appetites. Near the edge of the meadow, shrimp rise from shelter like transparent thoughts, their bodies visible only where a line or organ catches the remaining light. They hover, settle, and hover again, making tiny adjustments that keep them within the slower water around the grass. When they flick away, they leave no track, only a brief change in the arrangement of particles. Some lives are almost vanishing by nature. As the blue deepens, the meadow's bioluminescent hints return in the water above the blades. A passing movement touches invisible plankton, and the result is a soft scattering of pale green sparks, each one gone before it can become bright enough to wake the scene. These lights are not decoration, but living chemistry, small bodies responding to touch in the dark. The night speaks in glimmers. The glimmers make the meadow feel connected to the deeper sea, where many animals carry their own lights through black water. Yet here the glow remains close to the seagrass, caught among coastal currents and shallow warmth, like a faint memory of stars held under the surface. You do not need to follow it into the abyss, because the mystery is already present in this green bed. Darkness has depth even here. You remain suspended as the first full darkness settles, with leaves moving below and the surface no longer visible as a bright ceiling. The meadow is now felt more than seen, known by the soft brush of water, the dim suggestion of shapes, and the occasional spark when something disturbs the plankton. It is peaceful not because nothing is happening, but because everything happens within a rhythm that never asks you to hurry. The Sulu grass breathes in shadow. In the shadow, scent becomes more important for many animals, and the water carries chemical traces through the leaves, like messages written without ink. A crab finds food, a fish detects a neighbor, a shrimp follows a faint path toward particles loosened from the bottom. The meadow is crossed by invisible information, layered through currents that twist around every blade. The dark is full of signals. You can imagine those signals moving slowly, bending where the water bends, thinning where the flow quickens, gathering where seagrass slows the current. To an animal shaped for such perception, the meadow is not blank at night, but richly patterned with gradients, traces, and recent histories. A fallen leaf, a feeding fish, a stirred burrow, a passing turtle, all leave something in the water for a while. The sea remembers briefly through scent, and then even those traces move on, diluted into the wider coastal water, carried toward reef, channel, or shore. The meadow gives and receives continuously, never holding the same water for long, yet remaining itself through roots and recurring patterns. This is the strange calm of a flowing place, that it persists by letting almost everything pass through. To remain, it must release. Night deepens, and the animals settle into their darker arrangements. Some graze more freely, some hide more completely, and some move between patches with a confidence that belongs to hours without sun. The seagrass blades, no longer lit from above, become long, dark motions against darker water, but their presence is still clear in the way the current slows around you. You are held inside a moving quiet. The quiet is wide enough to include every hidden feeding, every breath of a buried clam, every slow scrape of a snail across a blade. It includes the turtle somewhere beyond sight, the rare possibility of a dugong in a farther meadow, the microbes in the sand, and the young fish resting in green cover. Nothing has to be visible to belong. The meadow's fullness does not depend on brightness. As you drift lower, close to the sand but still not touching it, the texture of the bottom becomes more imagined than seen. You sense the fine grains, the root mats, the old shell pieces, the buried organic layers, and the tunnels made by animals moving through the sediment. Above that hidden floor, the seagrass rises into darkness, continuing its slow motion even now. The whole place feels like a bed made for resting. Rest does not mean ending, because the meadow will brighten again with morning, and the plants will resume their work of turning light into life. But for now, in this warm Sulu darkness, the bed has folded its colors inward, and the living world continues in softer forms. You can let your attention loosen, no longer following every fish or every leaf, but feeling the whole meadow as one slow presence. The water holds you easily. A final faint sparkle moves through the grass as some unseen body stirs the plankton. It appears, fades, and leaves the darkness somehow deeper and more comforting than before. Around it, the seagrass sways, the sediment rests, and the animals continue their quiet lives beneath the night. You drift with them, held by warm water, rooted green, and the patient breathing of the Sulu Sea. The Sulu Sea holds that patience through the night, as though the entire meadow has become one long, unbroken exhale beneath the islands. The current moves over the blades with a softness that does not ask to be measured, and the leaves answer with the same dark swaying they have given all day. Somewhere close to the sand, a small animal turns in its shelter, and the water receives the motion without surprise. Everything continues in quiet. By now, the meadow is less a place you look at and more a place you feel around you, through the slow pressure of warm water and the muted brush of leaves. The darkness has taken away the bright details, but it has given back another kind of awareness, one that notices motion, nearness, and the delicate change of current along the skin. You are held among plants that will wait for morning, among animals that have learned the dark by living inside it. The world has narrowed, but it has also become deep. A crab moves along the base of the grass, touching one stem, then another, following traces that belong to food rather than sight. Its body lifts slightly over a root, settles again, and pauses near a pocket where old seagrass leaves have gathered into a soft tangle. There, it works with its small mouth parts, taking what the meadow has already loosened and what the microbes have begun to change. Feeding becomes a form of listening. The fallen leaves are quieter than the living ones, because they no longer rise toward light, yet they remain part of the meadow's slow life. They darken, soften, and open themselves to bacteria, fungi, and tiny grazers, until each piece becomes less like a blade and more like a shared meal. In warm water, this transformation can move steadily, but never feels hurried when you are drifting close to it. The old green returns as nourishment. In the sand beneath, the roots and rhizomes rest like a hidden net, holding grains that would otherwise travel more freely with waves and tide. They do not hold everything, because the sea always moves something onward, but they hold enough to give the bottom a memory of shape. Around them, buried animals make fine passages, and dissolved chemistry shifts in little zones too small for the eye but large enough for life. The floor is alive in layers. A small fish settles lower for the night, letting the blade stand between its body and the wider dark. Its fins make quiet corrections, just enough to keep it balanced in the slow water, and its gills open and close with the steadiness of a sleeping thought. It is not asleep in the human way, perhaps, but it has entered a reduced, sheltered kind of watchfulness. The meadow gives it cover. Others rest higher among the leaves, their bodies angled with the current so that they resemble pieces of shadow caught in the grass. Some fish change their colors or patterns at night, softening the brightness they carried during the day and becoming more like the dim world around them. The seagrass does not have to close around them completely, because darkness and pattern do much of that work together. Concealment here is gentle. Near the meadow edge, where sand opens toward reef rubble, a nocturnal fish begins to move more freely. It glides out from a crevice, crosses a patch of pale bottom, and enters the grass with measured turns that stir the plankton into faint points of light. The glow appears in its wake like a brief constellation made by motion, then vanishes before the water can seem bright. Night turns movement into stars. Those tiny lights do not stay, and that is part of their softness. They are not lamps placed in the water, but chemical responses from living cells. Small flashes released when bodies are disturbed by touch, current, or the passing of another creature. In the open sea, such light can be a language of startling variety, but here in the seagrass, it remains intimate and low. It is a whisper of brightness. You drift through that whisper without following any single spark too far. The meadow invites attention but not effort, because every detail arrives on its own when the body stops searching. A blade moves, a particle passes, a small glimmer rises and fades, and the whole scene becomes complete in each passing moment. There is nothing to grasp, only the slow permission to notice. The tide may be rising now, bringing slightly cooler water across the bed from a deeper channel beyond the reef. The leaves lean in a new direction, first subtly, and then with a shared certainty, as though the meadow has turned in its sleep. Tiny suspended fragments begin to travel along the same path, slipping between blades and over shell pieces, carrying traces from one part of the coast to another. The bed receives the tide as a message. With higher water, some animals gain easier passage over the shallowest flats, and the meadow becomes more open to visitors from neighboring habitats. Small reef fish may wander farther in. Larger grazers may cross from one patch to another, and the edge between seagrass and channel grows less strict for a while. The water lifts boundaries gently, not by removing them, but by making them easier to pass. The tide widens the room. In this lifted dark, a turtle could move above the meadow without scraping the highest leaves, carried by the buoyancy of deeper water. Its shell would make a slow shadow within shadow, and its flippers would press the sea in broad, unhurried strokes. If it paused to feed, the grass would bend and release around its head, and fragments would drift away for smaller mouths. The turtle's presence would be a calm weight. Farther away, in a broader and quieter bed, the thought of a dugong returns like a low note beneath the water. A dugong would not rush through this landscape, but graze along the bottom, lifting trails through the seagrass and sediment with a mouth shaped by generations of feeding low. Its rarity makes it feel almost dreamlike, yet its needs are simple in the way ancient needs are simple, asking for healthy meadows, quiet water, and time. The bed holds that possibility like a prayer. Whether or not such a large grazer is near, the meadow carries signs of many appetites. Short-cropped patches, scraped films, empty shells, stirred sediments, and fallen leaves all show that living here means taking and returning in the same slow system. Food is not separate from shelter, and shelter is not separate from growth, because the seagrass provides surfaces, shade, structure, and the beginning of many meals. Everything is joined by feeding. A shrimp hovers above a blade, nearly transparent, with only its eyes and fine inner lines catching the faintest suggestion of light. It lifts and lowers in the current, using its delicate legs to hold position, and then settles onto the leaf as if it has become part of the plant. There it picks at something too small for you to see. Perhaps a film, a particle, or a tiny animal hidden in the leaf's surface world. The large meadow is made of miniatures. Those miniatures are not decorative details, but working parts of the living system. Epiphytes grow on leaves, grazers crop them down, small predators feed on the grazers, and fish feed on the smaller animals that were feeding only moments before. The rhythm is circular and branching at once, a set of exchanges too numerous to follow but not too complex to feel. The meadow's abundance is woven. You move very slowly now, close enough to watch the bases of the blades disappear into sediment. Some shoots rise alone, others cluster tightly, and between them lie pockets of trapped organic matter, shell grit, and tiny openings into burrows. The sand is not flat when you come this close, but uneven with the small architecture of living and settling. At this scale, the bottom becomes a landscape. A mound of grains beside a hole may mark the work of a burrowing shrimp, worm, or crab, though the maker remains hidden. The opening is dark, round, and still, with only a slight movement of fine particles suggesting something inside is changing position. Many homes in the meadow are like this, not houses in any human sense, but temporary arrangements of body, sediment, and need. Shelter can be as simple as an opening. Inside such openings, animals are protected from the sweep of current and the searching eyes of passing fish. They can feed, rest, molt, or wait through the bright hours, emerging when darkness gives the meadow another texture. The burrow changes the sediment, and the sediment shapes the burrow, each one adjusting to the other through many small acts of maintenance. Even hidden lives reshape the floor. The floor, in turn, shapes the water just above it. Low mounds create eddies, burrow openings gather particles, root mats slow the lifting of grains, and leaf bases make a tangled zone where current breaks into softer paths. To a tiny animal, these changes are as meaningful as hills, walls, and valleys, though they rise only a few centimeters from the sand. Scale turns softness into structure. You drift over a place where old shell fragments have collected into a pale scatter, each curve catching the faint nightlight differently. Some fragments are sharp-edged from recent breaking, while others are smoothed until they look like small moons half buried in the sediment. Over time, they may become sand, or shelter, or a surface for new life to grip. The sea takes hard things and makes them usable. A hermit crab chooses among such shells, not as objects, but as futures for its soft body. The right shell gives it cover, balance, and room enough to grow for a while, until the body changes and the search begins again. It carries its shelter across the meadow, and by moving, turns an old shell into a wandering home. Even emptiness, once inhabited again, becomes purposeful. The night remains warm, and the water holds the memory of sunlight long after the sky above has gone dark. Tropical shallows can store that warmth in the upper layers, while the deeper channels nearby send subtle cooler threads across the bottom with the tide. You feel these threads not as coldness, but as a slight difference in the water's touch, a quiet variation passing through the meadow. Temperature becomes a texture. The creatures here know those textures through their bodies. Fish sense changes in pressure and movement along their lateral lines. Crabs read chemicals and touch through antennae and limbs, and mollusks respond to subtle shifts in water and sediment around them. Their world is not less detailed than yours because it is underwater and dark. It is detailed in other languages. The meadow is written in sensation. Above the bed, plankton drift with less control than fish, but even their small lives are not completely passive. Some rise and fall through the water column, responding to light, gravity, chemistry, or the cycles of night and day. Others remain carried by currents, entering the seagrass zone briefly before moving on toward reef, channel, or open water. The meadow is one resting place in the plankton's journey. When plankton pass through the seagrass, they may feed animals waiting among the leaves. A small fish snaps at a drifting speck, a hydroid catches a tiny swimmer, a bivalve filters suspended cells, and a sponge draws the water inward through its channels. What the current brings is gathered by many different bodies in many different ways. The tide is a slow provider. The night tide moves on, and the meadow's shadows move with it. You can almost feel the leaves combing the water, not stopping it, but changing its speed and direction so that particles settle where they might otherwise pass. In that softened water, larvae may find a place to land, sediments may gather around roots, and small animals may spend less energy holding position. The plants make calm from motion. This calm is one reason seagrass beds can be so full of young life. A larval fish or invertebrate arriving from the plankton does not find an empty plain, but a textured field of surfaces, scents, and shadows. Settlement is a delicate decision shaped by inherited responses and environmental cues, and many lives begin their bottom-dwelling chapters only when the signals are right. The meadow calls without a voice. A tiny juvenile, newly settled, may be nearly invisible, no more than a flicker close to the sand. It must learn the bed by moving through it, by finding food and avoiding open brightness, by choosing when to freeze and when to slip deeper into cover. Its world is only a small patch of the meadow, yet that patch contains enough complexity for a life to begin. Smallness makes the meadow immense. You pass above it without disturbance, your imagined body moving with the same softness as the water around you. The seagrass closes and opens beneath, and the darkness holds the young fish, the crabs, the buried clams, and the endless small grazers on the leaves. There is no need to separate them into foreground and background now, because at night, the whole bed becomes one connected presence. It rests and works in the same breath. Toward the deeper edge of the meadow, the leaves grow sparser, and the sand patches widen into dim open spaces. The current there feels more continuous, less filtered by dense grass, and the animals hold themselves differently in the stronger flow. Some fish remain near the last thick clumps, while others cross the open areas with calm, purposeful movement. The meadow fades outward by degrees. At this edge, you can sense the wider sea waiting, not threatening, simply larger and less sheltered. The Sulu Sea extends into basins, reefs, channels, and blue distances where the bottom drops away and different communities take over. But the seagrass does not feel small beside that wideness, because its richness is concentrated close to the sand, in roots, leaves, and lives that make use of every sheltered inch. A meadow can be vast in detail. The open water carries sounds from beyond the bed, softened by distance and depth. There may be low movements from waves over reef, faint biological clicks, and the continuous pressure sound of water shifting through channels under the pull of the moon. None of it breaks the calm, because underwater distance rounds every sound before it reaches you. The world arrives as a murmur. You drift back toward the thicker grass, where the murmur is filtered by leaves and the bottom rises slightly. The meadow accepts you again into its closer texture, and the open sea becomes less present, more like a thought beyond a curtain. Here, the night animals continue their routes with patient regularity, moving over sand, through blades, and along hidden chemical paths. The grass makes a room. A small octopus may explore the meadow edge, though it is more often associated with rocks, rubble, and crevices where its soft body can fold into shelter. If it passes through, it would move like poured shadow, tasting the world with arms that are almost all touch, changing texture and color with astonishing subtlety. In the quiet of this narration, it is not a spectacle, only another soft intelligence crossing the bed. The meadow welcomes strangeness. Its arms would search beneath shells and along the bases of plants, finding little pockets of food that sight alone would miss. Then it might gather itself and flow toward a coral fragment, leaving the seagrass swaying behind in the water it displaced. Such a visit would be brief, but it would add another line to the meadow's nightly pattern. Passing lives still belong. The bed is full of visitors and residents, and the difference between those categories is often softer than it seems. A fish may use the meadow only as a juvenile, a turtle may arrive for feeding, a crab may spend its whole life within a few meters, and plankton may pass through in minutes. Each timescale is valid, each use real, and all of them help define what the seagrass bed is. Places made by return and passage. You feel the return of the tide in the regular leaning of leaves, and the passage in the drift of particles across your vision. Nothing stays entirely still, yet the meadow remains recognizable, just as a song remains itself while every note fades as soon as it is sounded. This is one of the gentlest lessons of water, that continuity can be made from constant change. The sea keeps form through flow. By the deepest part of night, the water seems to darken beyond color, and the seagrass becomes a motion more than a sight. You sense the blades as they pass near one another, as they slow the current, as they outline the hidden floor beneath you. The animals are still there, feeding, resting, sensing and breathing, but their bodies have mostly dissolved into darkness. The meadow is present as movement. In that movement, your own thoughts can loosen, becoming less like separate objects and more like particles carried by the tide. One thought rises, catches a little inner light, and then drifts down into the same quiet that held the thought before it. The seagrass bed does not ask you to hold anything in place, because it shows how much can continue without effort. Letting go becomes natural. The night slowly thins toward morning, though the change is so gradual that it feels less like an arrival than a softening of the dark. First, the black water becomes blue-black, then the blades closest to the surface take on a faint outline, and the sand begins to return as a pale suggestion beneath them. Animals respond before the world looks bright to you, because their senses are tuned to smaller shifts. Dawn begins in subtlety. Crabs that traveled openly through the night begin to favor cover again, stepping into leaf bases and burrow mouths. Shrimp settle lower, their transparent bodies becoming even harder to see as light returns to the water. Some fish lift from their sheltered positions and move carefully outward, beginning the day's first slow routes through the grass. The meadow changes hands between night and day. The first sun does not strike the bed sharply because it passes through sky, surface, ripple, and water before reaching the leaves. It arrives broken, softened, and greened by the sea, laying faint moving lines across the sand and the living blades. Each line trembles with the surface above, so the bottom seems to remember waves it cannot touch directly. Light descends as water. As the light strengthens, the plants begin again to gather energy, opening the day with a process that is silent but immense. Carbon moves into tissues, oxygen gathers and dissolves, sugars are made and shared through living structures below the sand. The meadow does not wake with sound, but with chemistry, with leaf surfaces brightening and root systems receiving what the sun has given. Morning is a kind of making. A rabbitfish group appears in the clearer water, their bodies moving through the leaves with a softness that makes feeding seem almost meditative. They pause, graze, and move on, each small bite part of a larger pattern that keeps surfaces cropped and energy moving. Their bodies carry the meadow's green production into muscle, fin, and motion, and later perhaps into other parts of the coastal sea. The plants become swimmers. Small wrasses follow through the brighter patches, picking at tiny animals disturbed by the morning graze. Their movements are more lively than the leaves, but still held by the same slow water, turning and returning without breaking the meadow's calm. A goby watches from the sand, lifting slightly, then settling again with its belly close to the bottom. The day resumes its delicate traffic. The sand shows new marks now, written during the night while the darker animals moved across the bed. There are fine tracks from crabs, little furrows from snails, softened pits where something fed, and faint plumes settled into low fans near burrow openings. By noon, many of these marks will be blurred by current and new activity, but in morning they are still readable. The night has left a script. You read it without needing every translation. A curved line may mean a shell carried by a hermit crab, a paired track may mean the steps of a crustacean, and a small depression may mark the place where a ray or fish disturbed the bottom. Even uncertainty is peaceful here, because the meadow offers signs rather than demands. The sand keeps its stories soft. As the sun rises higher, the water grows warmer in feeling and clearer in color, and the green meadow gains depth. The blades that were dark silhouettes at dawn now show veins, edges, scars, and coatings of fine life. Tiny bubbles begin to form in places where sunlight touches the leaves strongly enough, and they cling for a while before slipping upward. The bed shines with breath. Those bubbles are small enough to seem ornamental, yet they are part of a vast exchange between plant, animal, water, and air. The oxygen they represent may dissolve into the surrounding water, rise toward the surface, or enter hidden spaces around roots where chemistry is always shifting. In a meadow, even a bubble can tell the story of sunlight reaching the seafloor. The smallest sign can feel whole. A turtle approaches in the distance, visible now not as an imagined possibility, but as a slow shape moving over the brighter grass. It comes with a calm that belongs to animals supported by water, each flipper stroke broad and unforced, each pause filled with suspension. Small fish adjust around it, but there is no burst of urgency, only a widening and settling of paths. The meadow makes space for arrival. The turtle lowers itself toward a cropped patch and begins to feed, taking the leaves in steady bites. Its head moves with quiet purpose, and bits of green drift loose around its mouth, turning slowly before settling or being carried away. On its shell, the light breaks into moving patches that resemble sun on old stone, and its dark eye reflects the shimmering meadow beneath it. The whole scene feels ancient. Grazing by turtles can shape seagrass meadows, keeping some areas shorter and encouraging tender regrowth when the balance remains healthy. The turtle is not outside the ecosystem, visiting from elsewhere, but part of a long relationship between plant growth, animal appetite, nutrient return, and movement across coastal waters. It feeds and is nourished, but it also edits the meadow's structure in gentle arcs and patches. Its appetite becomes pattern. After a while, the turtle lifts and drifts forward, leaving the cropped place behind. It may rise to breathe, or move toward another patch, or rest near a deeper edge where the current is cool and the water clearer. The meadow below it continues without pause, receiving the loosened fragments and adjusting around the space it has made. A large life passes, and small lives continue. In the cleared patch, sunlight reaches the bottom more easily, and little fish come close to investigate. Some pick at exposed surfaces, others hover along the edge where short new leaves meet taller cover, and a crab steps through the area with careful attention to scent and texture. The turtle's feeding has created a temporary room within the grass, and the meadow begins immediately to fill it with use. Space becomes opportunity. The new shoots that rise there in coming days will be bright and tender, though you do not need to rush forward in time to feel their possibility. The roots are already present beneath the sand, holding the plant's memory and capacity for return. A meadow is always growing into what has been opened, always answering absence with green persistence where conditions allow. Regrowth is a slow answer. You drift over the cropped patch and then beyond it, into taller leaves where the light dims again. The change from open brightness to green shade is soothing, like moving from a sunlit doorway into a cool room. Small fish hang in the interior, more numerous here, using the taller blades as cover from above and from the sides. The meadow folds you into shadow. In the shade, you notice the epiphytes more clearly, the fine brownish film and tiny branching growths that make each blade more than a plant surface. These coatings are grazed by snails, shrimp, amphipods, and fish, and their abundance changes with light, nutrients, water movement, and the animals that keep them cropped. Too much growth could shade the leaf, but in balance it becomes another layer of food and habitat. The blade carries a community. A leaf may be photosynthesizing with its own tissues while hosting algae that also photosynthesize, animals that graze, and microbes that transform tiny molecules at the surface. It is a living platform in a moving fluid, never alone even when it seems simple. The meadow, therefore, is not just a collection of plants, but a collection of countless small surfaces where life gathers and exchanges. Surface becomes world. The more you settle into this way of seeing, the less any part of the bed feels empty. The open sand has burrows and buried bodies, the grass has grazers and films, the rubble has sponges and crevices, and the water itself has plankton drifting through. Even the shadows are occupied by possibilities, by animals that are present without offering themselves clearly to sight. The whole place is inhabited. A small group of fish crosses from one dense patch to another, passing through a bright opening in a loose silver thread. For a few seconds, their bodies are obvious against the sand, and then they disappear in the grass on the far side. The crossing is ordinary, but it shows how the meadow is used as a landscape, with roots, refuges, edges, and temporary risks. Every animal carries a map made of habit. Those maps are not drawn, but learned through senses and repetition. A fish knows where cover thickens, where food tends to drift, where the current is softer, and where the edge opens toward reef or sand. A crab knows certain root tangles, a snail follows surfaces, and a turtle remembers broad feeding areas across a wider coast. The meadow is navigated by memory. Memory in animals meets memory in plants, and sediment because the bed also remembers through roots that survive, seeds that wait, and layers that hold traces of past growth. It remembers storms by altered patches, grazing by cropped lawns, and calm seasons by expanded shoots. None of this memory is conscious, yet it shapes what happens next as surely as any remembered path shapes a traveler. The ecosystem keeps history without words. The current strengthens slightly, and the leaves lean lower, making the taller stand look like a field brushed by a slow hand. Fish adjust their positions, facing into the flow where food and scent arrive, while tiny particles stream past in lines that reveal the water's direction. The whole meadow becomes a visible current meter, each blade showing what the water is doing now. Science can be as soft as watching. To study such a place is not to remove its wonder, but to deepen the patience with which you see it. Knowing that seagrass is a flowering plant, that roots oxygenate sediment, that grazers shape regrowth, and that meadows store carbon only makes the quiet more intricate. Facts do not harden the scene when they are held gently. They let the stillness become more detailed. Understanding can be tender. You continue through the Sulu bed as afternoon gathers again, and the light begins its slow turn toward gold. The meadow has carried you through darkness, dawn, morning, and day without ever leaving its own rhythm. The creatures have appeared and hidden, fed and rested, crossed and returned, while the plants have kept swaying beneath every change. Time here feels circular, but never empty. In the late light, the sand warms in color, and the leaves become edged with amber where the sun slips lower across the water. Fish that were bright at noon now look softer, their colors absorbed into the green and gold of the bed. A crab pauses at the mouth of a burrow, half in light and half in shade, as if waiting for evening to finish opening. The day leans toward rest. Soon the nocturnal animals will become more confident again, and the diurnal fish will choose their sheltered positions among the blades. The meadow will pass once more through the interval where neither day nor night fully holds it, and every shape is softened by transition. That hour belongs to slow changes, to bodies adjusting, to colors deepening, and to the first faint lights hidden in the water. Evening is a threshold. You drift within that threshold, letting the seagrass move around you and beneath you. The Sulu Sea above has no hard ceiling now, only a dimming surface that gathers the last light and turns it to silver. The bed below remains rooted, swaying, breathing, inhabited, and ancient in its quiet repetitions, and you remain here with it, floating gently over sand and grass, while the warm water carries the day into shadow.